The scent hit me first. Wild pine and earth mingled with the metallic tang of blood. Rain pattered against the decaying roof of the abandoned hunting cabin, its rhythm uneven and restless like my heartbeat. I pressed my back against the splintered wall, trying to become invisible as Uncle Reed's hunting party stomped their boots at the entrance, their laughter sharp and cruel in the gathering twilight. "Cassidy, bring the lanterns!" My uncle's voice boomed through the cabin, making me flinch. "And stay close to the men. These woods aren't safe for a girl like you." A girl like me. The words hung in the air like a curse. Weak, fragile, unwanted. The orphaned niece who should be grateful for the scraps of belonging tossed her way. I tucked a strand of pale blonde hair behind my ear and moved toward the supplies, the silver pendant my mother had given me before she died, catching the fading light. "Stay true to your heart, Cassidy. It sees what eyes cannot." The pendant was warm against my skin as I gathered the lanterns, my fingers trembling slightly. I'd come on this hunting trip as a last, desperate attempt to earn my place in the only family I had left. But 3 days in, all I'd earned were blisters and sidelong glances that made it clear I didn't belong. "Hurry up, girl," Uncle Reed snapped, his breath heavy with whiskey. "We caught something special tonight. Something that'll put us in the history books of this godforsaken town." I handed out the lanterns, moving among the 5 men who composed our hunting party. My cousin Derek refused to meet my eyes as he took his, while the others, Mike, Liam, and Jonah, grabbed theirs with rough hands that lingered too long against my skin. "What did you catch?" I asked, trying to sound interested, trying to belong. Uncle Reed's smile was all teeth. "Not what, who. The beast that's been terrorizing Blackwater Ridge." He gestured toward the back room with his chin. "Go see for yourself. Might put some spine in you." The men chuckled, a sound that raised the hair on the back of my neck. I hesitated, then moved toward the door, drawn by curiosity and the desperate need to prove myself. The floorboards creaked beneath my boots, announcing each uncertain step. The smell grew stronger as I pushed the door open. Earth and pine and blood. But now something else. Something electric that made the air feel heavy and dangerous. The lantern light spilled into the darkness, illuminating the far corner of the room, and there he was. A massive wolf with fur the color of midnight, bound with thick silver chains to a support beam. But as my light fell across him, I realized this was no ordinary wolf. His body seemed to shift and blur at the edges, caught between forms. And his eyes, they looked up at me with human intelligence, burning with a mixture of pain and defiance that stole my breath. The silver chains were burning into his flesh, leaving raw, blistered skin wherever they touched. I gasped, taking an involuntary step forward. "Careful," Uncle Reed said from behind me, his voice low with warning and something else. Pride. "That there is a werewolf, first one caught in these parts in 50 years. "Werewolf," I whispered, unable to look away from those piercing eyes the color of a storm-tossed sea. "That's impossible." "Not impossible, just rare," Uncle Reed said. "And valuable. The council will pay handsomely for him. Or his pelt, if he doesn't survive till morning." He laughed, and the sound echoed hollowly in the small room. "Silver's poison to their kind. Keeps them from shifting fully. Keeps them weak." The wolf, the man, snarled, lunging forward only to be yanked back by the chains. Fresh blood welled where the silver bit deeper into his skin. "Stop it," I said, the words escaping before I could catch them. "You're hurting him." The silence that followed was deafening. Then Uncle Reed's hand came down hard on my shoulder, fingers digging in painfully. "It's not a him, Cassidy. It's an it. A monster. And monsters deserve what they get." He pushed me aside and strode back into the main room, calling for the others to break out the celebratory whiskey. I stood frozen, the lantern trembling in my grip as the wolf's eyes remained fixed on mine. "Help me." The voice whispered through my mind, clear as day though the wolf's jaws hadn't moved. I nearly dropped the lantern, stumbling backward in shock. "Please. The silver will kill me by dawn." "You're in my head," I whispered, glancing nervously toward the door. "Yes." The voice was deep, resonant, laced with pain. "I am Callum. Alpha of the Blackwater Pack, and if I die, my people will be left defenseless. I shook my head, pressing my palm against my temple. This isn't real. Werewolves aren't real. What do you see before you? I had no answer. The evidence was chained and bleeding on the floor before me. They will kill me at first light, or sell me to those who will do worse. Please. The pendant at my throat burned suddenly hot, my mother's words echoing in my memory. Stay true to your heart, Cassidy. It sees what eyes cannot. From the main room came the sounds of celebration. Glasses clinking, voices growing louder as the whiskey flowed. They wouldn't check on the prisoner again until morning. They were too confident in their silver chains, too assured of their victory. I shouldn't care. This creature, this man, was nothing to me, less than nothing. A monster from stories meant to frighten children, and yet the cruelty of the silver burning into his flesh, the intelligence and pain in those storm-gray eyes, the desperate plea in that deep voice that had somehow reached into my mind, it all tugged at something within me, something that had always set me apart. An empathy too keen, a heart too soft for the harsh world of Blackwater Ridge. Before I could second-guess myself, I set the lantern down and approached him, moving slowly, my hands raised to show I meant no harm. Up close, his size was even more intimidating, his shoulders broader than any man I'd known, his presence filling the small room despite his bound state. If I help you, I whispered. Do you swear not to hurt me, not to hurt them? I nodded toward the main room. Contempt flashed in his eyes. I do not harm the innocent, even those who keep poor company. They're my family, I said, though the word felt hollow on my tongue. Are they? His gaze seemed to pierce through me, reading the loneliness etched into my bones. Do they treat you as such? I didn't answer. Instead, I reached for the chains, then hesitated. I don't have a key. The lock is silver. It will burn me if I try to break it. But you. Understanding dawned. I examined the lock, a simple mechanism that might yield to pressure in the right spot. I pulled a hairpin from my braid and bent to the task, glancing nervously toward the door every few seconds. The lock was stubborn, resistant to my clumsy attempts. Sweat beaded on my forehead as I worked, acutely aware of the massive predator inches from my face, of the raucous laughter from the other room that could stop at any moment. You have gentle hands, the voice observed, softer now. Hands that heal, not harm. I'm just a girl, I murmured, focusing on the lock. Nobody important. That remains to be seen. A click, small but distinct. The lock opened. I began unwinding the silver chains, careful not to let them drop noisily to the floor. As each length of silver fell away, I could see the wolfman's form becoming more solid, the blurring at the edges fading. The wounds left behind were raw and angry, weeping clear fluid mixed with blood. Can you walk? I whispered, removing the last chain. In answer, he rose to his feet and kept rising, his form shifting and expanding until a man stood before me, naked and imposing, his body mapped with scars old and new. Only his eyes remained unchanged, storm gray and fixed intently on mine. Dark hair fell to broad shoulders, and despite his wounds, he radiated a power that made the small room feel airless. I stumbled backward, a small sound escaping my throat. Do not fear me, he said, his voice the same deep timbre that had spoken in my mind, though now it filled the physical space between us. You have done me a service I will not forget. He moved toward the window, his movements liquid despite his injuries. Wait, I said, suddenly afraid. Not of him, but for him. You're hurt. They'll track you. He turned back, his expression unreadable in the dim light. Then come with me. The words hung in the air between us, impossible and alluring all at once. I can't just leave, I said, though even as I spoke, I wondered what exactly I would be leaving behind. A life of being tolerated but never valued, of existing on the edges of belonging. You can, he said simply, and after what you've done tonight, it might be safer. He glanced meaningfully toward the main room. They will not forgive the betrayal. As if summoned by his words, a shout came from the doorway. "What the hell?" I whirled to find my cousin Derek standing there, his face contorted with shock and rage, the whiskey bottle slipping from his fingers to shatter on the floor. "Cassidy, get away from it," he yelled, reaching for the hunting knife at his belt. Everything happened at once. Derek lunged forward. Callum moved with inhuman speed, placing himself between us, and I, acting on instinct alone, grabbed the lantern and hurled it at the dry wooden wall. Fire bloomed instantly, hungry flames leaping up the ancient timbers. Derek stumbled backward with a curse as smoke billowed through the room. In the chaos, a strong arm wrapped around my waist, and suddenly I was airborne, crashing through the window in a shower of glass and splintered wood, clasped tightly against a chest that rumbled with a growl that was anything but human. We hit the ground running, or rather, he ran, carrying me as if I weighed nothing, plunging into the dark forest as shouts and confusion erupted behind us. The cold night air whipped tears from my eyes, or perhaps I was simply crying, the enormity of what I'd just done crashing over me in waves. I had freed a werewolf. I had set fire to my uncle's hunting cabin. I had fled with a creature from legends. There was no going back. "I can't," I gasped, the words torn away by the speed of our flight. "You can," Callum replied, his voice steady despite our pace. "And you will." The forest blurred around us as he ran, following paths invisible to human eyes, putting distance between us and the hunters who would soon be in pursuit. I should have been terrified. Instead, pressed against the solid warmth of his chest, listening to the strong, steady beat of his heart, I felt something unfamiliar bloom within me. Not safety. The night was too wild, our flight too desperate for that. Not comfort. His grip was too tight, the future too uncertain. No. What I felt was something both simpler and more profound. Freedom. Dawn found us deep in the forest, in a place where the trees grew so dense that they filtered the early morning light into dappled patterns on the moss-covered ground. Callum had finally stopped running, setting me down beside a small spring that bubbled up between ancient stones covered in emerald lichen. My legs trembled beneath me, unused to the wild flight through the darkness, and I sank down onto a fallen log, trying to catch my breath and my bearings. "Drink," Callum commanded, gesturing to the spring. "The water here is pure. It will strengthen you." I hesitated, then cupped my hands and dipped them into the icy water, bringing it to my lips. It tasted of minerals and something else, something vital and ancient that seemed to course through my veins, chasing away some of the bone-deep exhaustion. "Where are we?" I asked, my voice hoarse from the smoke and the night air. Deep in Blackwater territory, my territory. Callum stood a few paces away, his posture alert as he scanned the forest around us. Sometime during the night, he had shifted partially back to human form, though his movements still carried the fluid grace of the wolf. He had also acquired clothing, a pair of worn jeans that hung low on his hips, leaving his torso bare. In the morning light, I could see the full extent of the damage the silver chains had wrought. Angry red welts crisscrossed his arms and chest, the skin blistered and raw. "Your wounds," I said, rising instinctively. "They need to be treated." He glanced down at his injuries with detachment. "They will heal. Our kind recovers quickly." "Not from silver," I said, remembering my uncle's words. "Silver is poison to you." A flicker of surprise crossed his features. "You know our ways?" I shook my head. "No, just what my uncle said." The mention of Uncle Reed sent a fresh wave of panic through me. "They'll be looking for us. For me. I burned down the cabin. I helped you escape." The reality of what I'd done crashed over me anew. Oh God, what have I done? I can never go back. "Would you want to?" Callum asked, his voice deceptively soft. "Return to those who valued you so little?" I looked up at him, startled by the insight. "They're my family, the only one I have left." "Family is more than blood," he said, and something in his tone suggested he knew this truth intimately. "Family protects, values, cherishes." He stepped closer, those storm-gray eyes searching mine. "Did they do any of those things for you, Cassidy?" My name on his lips sent an unexpected shiver down my spine. I looked away, unable to hold his gaze or answer his question honestly. The truth was too raw, too close to the surface after the night's events. "We should keep moving," I said instead. "They'll track us." "Not here." Callum gestured to the surrounding forest. "We've crossed into pack territory. These woods answer to me, not them." As if in confirmation, a distant howl rose on the morning air, then another and another, until a chorus of wolves seemed to surround us. But unlike the hunting calls I'd heard before, these held a different note. A welcome. A celebration. "Your pack," I said, understanding dawning. He nodded, a smile ghosting across his lips for the first time. "They know their alpha has returned." The smile faded. "But they also know I was captured. That humans have learned of our existence. It changes things." I wrapped my arms around myself, suddenly cold despite the growing warmth of the day. "Because of my uncle. Because the secret we have kept for generations has been compromised." He paused, his head tilting slightly as if listening to something beyond human hearing. "They're coming. My beta and sentinels." He turned those penetrating eyes back to me. "You freed me at great personal cost. For that, you have my protection. But others in my pack may not welcome a human among us." The realization that I was heading toward a pack of werewolves, creatures I hadn't even believed existed a day ago, sent a fresh jolt of fear through me. Maybe I should go. Find a town. Start over somewhere new. "With what resources?" Callum asked pragmatically. "Besides, your uncle's hunting party will search the surrounding towns first. You would be found before nightfall." He was right. I had nothing but the clothes on my back. A thermal shirt, jeans, and boots, all smudged with soot and torn from our escape through the woods. No money, no identification, no supplies. I was as trapped as Callum had been in those silver chains, though my prison was circumstance rather than metal. Before I could respond, the underbrush rustled, and 3 figures emerged into the clearing. 2 men and a woman, all carrying themselves with the same predatory grace as Callum, all regarding me with varying degrees of suspicion and hostility. "Alpha," the tallest of the men said, dropping to one knee in a gesture of respect that seemed at odds with the modern clothing they all wore. "We thought you lost to us." "Rise, Nathan," Callum said, his posture subtly shifting, shoulders squaring, chin lifting. Even wounded, he radiated authority. I would have been, if not for this human. All 3 pairs of eyes turned to me, assessing, calculating. The woman, her hair a riot of dark curls framing a face of severe beauty, stepped forward with a snarl. "You bring a hunter to our lands?" she demanded, addressing Callum but glaring at me. "After what they did to you? After what they've done to our kind for centuries?" "I'm not a hunter," I said, finding my voice despite the fear tightening my throat. I just went along on the trip. I didn't know what they were hunting." "And yet you wear their scent," the woman said, her nose wrinkling in disgust. "You carry their blood in your veins." "Enough, Sarah," Callum said, his voice quiet but brooking no argument. "She freed me when she could have left me to die. She burned bridges with her own kind to save mine. She is under my protection." A tense silence followed his words. The 3 newcomers exchanged glances, a wordless communication passing between them. "The council will need to be informed," Nathan said finally. "Humans knowing of our existence changes everything. The treaties." "I am aware," Callum cut him off. "But first, I need rest and healing. The silver has weakened me more than I care to admit." As if his words had broken a dam, I suddenly noticed the pallor beneath his tanned skin, the slight tremor in his hands, the lines of pain etched around his eyes. He had carried me through the night, outrunning pursuit, all while fighting the poison of the silver burning through his system. "You need a healer," I said, stepping forward instinctively, only to freeze when all 4 werewolves turned to look at me with surprise. "And what would you know of healing our kind, human?" Sarah asked, her tone scathing. I lifted my chin. "I know those wounds need cleaning. I know the silver needs to be drawn out. I know infection doesn't care what species you are." I turned to Callum. "I worked at the clinic in town. I'm not a doctor, but I have some training. Let me help you. It's the least I can do after you saved me." Callum studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Very well. Though our healer will have the final say." Nathan made a sound of protest, but Callum silenced him with a look. "She comes with us. That is final." With that decree, we set off deeper into the forest. The 3 werewolves formed a loose perimeter around Callum and me, alert to any sign of pursuit or threat. I walked beside Callum, acutely aware of his presence, of the occasional brush of his arm against mine when the path narrowed. Though he hid it well, I could tell each step cost him. The silver was taking its toll. "How much further?" I asked quietly, after we had walked for nearly an hour. "Not far," he replied, his voice tight with pain. "Our settlement lies in the heart of the forest, hidden from human paths and eyes." "Settlement?" I expected. "I don't know, caves or dens." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "We are not savages, Cassidy. We have homes, businesses, lives. We simply choose to live them away from human scrutiny." I felt my cheeks warm with embarrassment. "I'm sorry. This is all so new to me. Yesterday, werewolves were just stories. And today?" he asked, those storm-gray eyes searching mine again. "Today, I'm walking with one," I said simply. "Today, everything I thought I knew has changed." He nodded, seeming satisfied with my answer. Change can be frightening. It can also be necessary, transformative. He glanced at me sidelong, like a girl breaking silver chains in the dead of night. Before I could respond, we crested a small rise, and I stopped short, my breath catching in my throat. Below us, nestled in a hidden valley, lay what could only be described as a small town. Wooden cabins and stone buildings arranged in concentric circles around a large central structure, smoke curling from chimneys, people, werewolves, moving about their daily tasks. Gardens and training grounds, a communal fire pit, children playing under the watchful eyes of elders. It was nothing like the savage lair I had unconsciously expected. It was a community, a home. "Welcome to Blackwater Pack," Callum said, a note of pride in his voice despite his weakened state. One of the oldest werewolf settlements in this part of the world. As we descended into the valley, our presence did not go unnoticed. Activity ceased as we passed, people stopping to stare, to whisper behind their hands. Some dropped to one knee as Callum passed, others simply bowed their heads in respect. But all of them looked at me with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. "They're afraid of me," I murmured, shrinking closer to Callum unconsciously. "They fear what you represent," he corrected. "Humans who know of our existence have historically meant one thing: hunters. Death." We approached the central building, a structure of stone and timber that rose 2 stories high, its design somehow both rustic and elegant. Guards flanked the entrance, their posture stiffening as they saw me. "Alpha," one began, clearly about to protest my presence. "She is with me," Callum said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Send for Elena." My quarters immediately. The guards exchanged glances but obeyed, one disappearing inside while the other held the door for us. As we crossed the threshold, Callum stumbled slightly, his composure finally cracking. Without thinking, I slipped under his arm, taking some of his weight. He stiffened for a moment, then allowed the support, his arm heavy but not unwelcome across my shoulders. "Second floor," he murmured, and I helped him navigate the wooden staircase that curved along one wall of what appeared to be a great hall. Curious eyes followed our progress, whispers rippling in our wake. Callum's quarters occupied most of the second floor, a spacious suite with high windows that let in dappled forest light. A massive bed dominated one wall, covered in furs and woven blankets. Bookshelves lined another, filled with volumes both ancient and modern. It was the space of a leader, but also of a scholar, a man of both action and thought. I helped him to a leather couch near a cold fireplace, easing him down as gently as I could. Up close, I could see the silver poisoning spreading beneath his skin, faint gray lines radiating outward from the wounds, like toxic rivers through his veins. "It's getting worse," I said, unable to keep the concern from my voice. Where's your healer? As if summoned by my words, the door opened, and a woman entered. Older, with silver streaking her auburn hair, her movements deliberate and assured. She carried a basket of supplies, her sharp eyes taking in the scene before her. Her alpha wounded on the couch, a strange human hovering anxiously nearby. "Silver burns," she said, her tone clinical as she set her basket down and approached Callum. "Deep ones. You're lucky to be alive." "Luck had little to do with it," Callum replied, his eyes flicking to me. "Elena, this is Cassidy. She freed me from hunters who had bound me with silver chains." Elena's eyebrows rose as she turned to study me more carefully. "Did she now?" She glanced back at Callum. "And you brought her here." "She has nowhere else to go," Callum said simply, "and the hunters will be looking for her as well as me." Elena nodded slowly, then gestured for me to step aside. "Well, Cassidy, since you've already shown a penchant for helping werewolves in distress, perhaps you'd like to assist me now. These wounds need cleaning before I can apply the poultice to draw out the silver." Surprised but grateful for the inclusion, I nodded and moved to wash my hands in a basin near the window. As the morning sunlight caught the water, turning it to liquid gold, I glanced out at the settlement below. At this hidden world I had stumbled into. At these people who existed in secret alongside humanity. I had freed a wolf from silver chains, and in doing so, I had freed myself from chains I hadn't even recognized were binding me. Invisible chains of expectation and rejection, of never quite belonging. What I didn't know yet was what this newfound freedom would cost. Or what new bonds might form in the broken places of the old. "Hold him steady," Elena instructed, her voice calm despite the tension filling the room. "This next part will hurt." I braced my hands against Callum's shoulders, feeling the coiled strength beneath my palms. The fever heat of his skin. We had spent the last hour cleaning his wounds, washing away dried blood and forest debris. Now came the difficult part, drawing out the silver that had entered his bloodstream. "I'm fine," Callum growled, though the sheen of sweat on his forehead belied his words. His eyes met mine, storm gray and intense. "Do what you must, Elena." The healer nodded and began applying a thick, greenish paste to the worst of the burns, a mixture of herbs and minerals that filled the room with an earthy, medicinal scent. The moment it touched his skin, Callum's body went rigid, a hiss escaping through clenched teeth. His hand shot out, fingers wrapping around my wrist in a grip that was just shy of painful. "Breathe through it," I murmured, the words coming instinctively. "Focus on my voice, the pain will pass." His eyes locked onto mine, pupils dilated with pain, but he nodded almost imperceptibly. I continued speaking softly, words of reassurance and distraction, while Elena worked methodically, covering each wound with the poultice, then wrapping it with strips of clean linen. "You have a healer's touch," Elena observed, glancing up at me. "And a steady hand under pressure." "I worked at the town clinic," I explained, still keeping my gaze on Callum. "Mostly reception and filing, but I helped with basic procedures sometimes." Elena's tone was noncommittal, but I sensed her reassessing me. "Well, your uncle's loss is our gain, it seems." At the mention of Uncle Reed, a fresh wave of anxiety washed over me. "They'll be looking for me. For us. I burned down the cabin when we escaped." "Good," Elena said briskly. "Fire cleanses. It will have destroyed most traces of Callum's presence, and yours." She finished the last bandage and began packing away her supplies. "The hunters will search. Yes, but they won't find this place. We've remained hidden for centuries for good reason. They know werewolves exist now," I pointed out. "They'll come with more men, with silver weapons." "Let them try," Callum said, his voice rough but stronger than before. The poultice was working already. Color was returning to his face. "Our pack is strong, and now we are warned. The council must be informed," Elena said, echoing Nathan's earlier concern. "This changes things, Callum. The treaties—" "I know." He cut her off, easing himself to a more upright position. "Call a meeting for tonight. I'll be strong enough by then." Elena looked like she wanted to object, but nodded instead. "Rest until then. I'll return in a few hours to change the bandages." She turned to me. "You should rest as well, girl. You look dead on your feet." Only then did I realize how exhausted I truly was. The adrenaline of the night's escape, the long forest trek, and the intensity of treating Callum's wounds had drained me completely. Now that the immediate crisis had passed, my body was demanding respite. "There's a washroom through there," Callum said, nodding toward a door in the corner, "and clean clothes in the chest by the window. They belong to—" He paused, something flickering across his features too quickly to read. "They'll fit you well enough." Elena gathered her supplies and departed with a final stern look at both of us, leaving us alone in the suddenly quiet room. The silence stretched between us, filled with unspoken questions, and the weight of decisions made in the dark of night that now had to be faced in the harsh light of day. "I should go," I said finally, rising from where I'd been kneeling beside the couch. "Let you rest. Stay," Callum said, and though his voice was soft, it carried the unmistakable ring of command. Then, perhaps sensing my resistance to being ordered, he added, "Please. You're safer here, under my direct protection. Some in the pack will be unhappy about your presence." I thought of Sarah's hostile glare, of the whispers and stares that had followed us through the settlement. "I don't want to cause trouble for you." "You saved my life," he replied simply. "Any trouble is a small price to pay." Too tired to argue further, I nodded and moved toward the washroom. It was smaller than I expected, but well appointed. A clawfoot tub, a sink with running water, towels that smelled of sunshine and pine. They had modern amenities here, I realized with surprise: electricity, plumbing. This hidden community was far from primitive. I stripped off my smoke-stained, forest-torn clothes and stepped into the tub, allowing the hot water to soak away the physical remnants of the past 24 hours. If only the emotional aftermath could be so easily cleansed. As I washed, the reality of my situation settled over me like a heavy cloak. I had no home to return to, no job, no possessions beyond what I wore. I had cut myself off from the only family I had known since my parents' death a decade ago. And for what? For a stranger. For a creature I hadn't believed existed until yesterday. The silver pendant my mother had given me, the only thing I had left of her, still hung around my neck, warm against my skin. "Stay true to your heart, Cassidy. It sees what eyes cannot." Had my heart seen something in Callum that my eyes had missed? Some connection? Some reason that had compelled me to risk everything to free him? Or had it simply been basic humanity? The unwillingness to watch another being suffer needlessly? I didn't know. And the not knowing was terrifying. After washing, I found the chest Callum had mentioned and selected a simple outfit. A soft gray t-shirt and black leggings that fit surprisingly well. Whose clothes were these? I wondered again. A past lover's? A pack member's? It felt strange to don the garments of someone connected to this world I knew nothing about, yet had irrevocably bound myself to through my actions. When I emerged from the washroom, I found Callum had moved from the couch to the bed, propped up against a mountain of pillows, a leather-bound book open in his lap. The bandages stood out starkly white against his tanned skin, but his eyes were clearer, the lines of pain around them softened. "Better?" he asked, setting the book aside. I nodded, suddenly self-conscious under his steady gaze. "Thank you for the clothes. They suit you," he observed. Then, perhaps sensing my unasked question, he added, "They belong to my sister Leah. She isn't with us anymore." "I'm sorry," I said, the simple words inadequate for the grief I glimpsed behind his carefully neutral expression. "It was long ago," he replied. "She would approve of them being used rather than gathering dust." I perched awkwardly on the edge of a chair near the bed, unsure what to do with myself in this strange new reality. Callum watched me, his expression thoughtful. "You have questions," he said finally. "Ask them." Where to begin? There were so many things I didn't understand, so many impossibilities that had become my new reality. "How long have werewolves existed?" I asked, starting with the most basic. "As long as humans," he replied. "Perhaps longer. The first shift is lost to history, but we have existed alongside humanity from the beginning, sometimes known, more often hidden." "And Blackwater Pack? How long have you been here?" "This settlement has stood for 3 centuries, though the pack itself is older. My family has led for 7 generations." I absorbed this, trying to reconcile the modern man before me with centuries of hidden history. And you're the alpha. What does that mean exactly? A smile touched his lips. It means I lead. I protect. I make decisions for the good of the pack. Like bringing home a human? I asked wryly. Like recognizing a debt owed, he corrected, and honoring it, regardless of consequences. The weight of his gaze made me look away. What will happen now? With me here? With hunters knowing about you? His expression sobered. That will be decided tonight at the council meeting. The pack elders, the neighboring alpha, representatives from the treaty alliance, all must be consulted. This affects more than just Blackwater. There are other packs, other supernatural creatures? He nodded. Many. Most prefer to remain hidden as we do. The last time humans hunted us openly, it did not end well, for either side. A chill ran through me at the implication. I'm sorry. For what my uncle did, for what humans have done. You are not responsible for the actions of your entire species, Callum said, his voice gentle. Just as I hope you will not hold me accountable for every tale of werewolves hunting humans in the night. The absurdity of our situation, a human and a werewolf discussing species relations while sitting in his bedroom, suddenly struck me, and a bubble of hysterical laughter escaped before I could stop it. Callum raised an eyebrow. Something amusing? All of this. I gestured between us, around the room. Yesterday I was just Cassidy Marshall, orphaned niece and town misfit. Today I trailed off, unsure how to define what I was now. Today you're still Cassidy Marshall, he said quietly. But perhaps you're discovering that you're more than you were allowed to be in that other life. His words struck a chord deep within me, touching on a truth I hadn't fully acknowledged. In Blackwater Ridge, I had always been defined by my losses, by my dependence on relatives who barely tolerated me. I had made myself small to fit into the space they allocated, grateful for scraps of belonging. Yet in one night, I had made a decision that revealed a strength I hadn't known I possessed. I had acted according to my own moral compass, consequences be damned. It was terrifying, but also liberating. You should rest, Callum said, breaking into my thoughts. The guest chamber adjoining this one is prepared. You'll be safe there. I nodded and rose, suddenly aware of the bone-deep exhaustion pulling at me. At the door to the adjoining room, I paused and looked back. Thank you. For bringing me here. For protecting me. Thank you, he countered, for seeing me as something worth saving. It's been a long time since anyone looked at me and saw beyond the alpha, the werewolf, the monster of human tales. Our gazes held for a moment longer, something unspoken passing between us. A recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits, two souls who had never quite fit into the worlds they were born to. Then I slipped through the door and collapsed onto the bed, surrendering to exhaustion. I dreamed of forests and moonlight, of silver chains and storm-gray eyes, of running, not away from something, but toward it, toward freedom, toward belonging. When I woke, twilight was painting the room in shades of lavender and gold. For a disorienting moment, I couldn't remember where I was. The bed was too soft, the air too fresh with pine and wildflowers instead of my aunt's cloying potpourri. Then memory rushed back, and I sat up abruptly, heart pounding. A soft knock came at the door connecting my room to Callum's. Cassidy, are you awake? Yes, I called, running fingers through my tangled blonde hair in a futile attempt to tame it. Come in. The door opened to reveal Callum, and I barely suppressed a gasp. Gone was the wounded, vulnerable man I had helped tend. In his place stood an alpha in his prime, dressed in dark jeans and a charcoal button-down that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders, his dark hair combed back from a face that seemed carved from granite in the fading light. Only the bandages visible at his collar and wrists hinted at his recent ordeal. The council is gathering, he said, his voice steady and strong. I'd like you to attend. Alarm shot through me. Me? Why? Because your actions precipitated this crisis, he replied frankly. And because I want them to see you as I do. Not as an enemy or a threat, but as an ally. Perhaps even a friend. Friend. The word hung between us, simple yet laden with meaning. Could a human and a werewolf be friends? Could someone like me find a place in this hidden world? I have nothing to wear to a werewolf council meeting, I said, falling back on practicality to mask my uncertainty. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Elena brought some things for you. They're in the wardrobe. Join me when you're ready. He turned to go, then paused, looking back over his shoulder. Cassidy, remember who you are tonight. The woman who broke silver chains when it would have been safer to walk away. The woman who followed her heart's truth, even into darkness. With that, he was gone, leaving me to prepare for a meeting that might well determine my fate and his. In the wardrobe, I found a simple but elegant dress of deep forest green with matching flats that fit as if they had been made for me. As I dressed, I couldn't help but wonder, was I being prepared as an honored guest? Or dressed for judgment? Either way, I decided, smoothing the dress over my hips and touching my mother's pendant for courage. I would face it with my head held high. I had made my choice in that hunting cabin. Now I would live with its consequences, whatever they might be. Taking a deep breath, I opened the door to face the wolves. The great hall had been transformed in the hours I'd slept. Torches blazed in wall sconces, casting dancing shadows across stone walls hung with tapestries depicting wolves running beneath full moons. A massive circular table dominated the center of the room, carved from a single ancient tree, its surface polished to a gleaming finish by generations of hands. Around it sat 12 people, men and women of varying ages, all with that same predatory grace I was beginning to recognize as the hallmark of their kind. Conversation ceased the moment Callum and I appeared at the top of the stairs. All eyes turned to us, expressions ranging from curiosity to barely concealed hostility. I fought the urge to shrink behind him, instead lifting my chin and meeting their gazes steadily. Though my heart hammered against my ribs, "The Alpha approaches," announced a white-haired man standing near the table. And his guest. The hesitation before the word guest was slight but unmistakable. I was an intruder here, an anomaly. The air in the room seemed to thicken with tension as we descended the stairs. Callum moved with fluid confidence, his hand resting lightly at the small of my back, guiding me. Though the gesture appeared casual, I understood its significance. He was publicly declaring his protection. I was under his wing, untouchable. "Esteemed council," Callum said, his voice resonating through the hall. "Thank you for gathering on such short notice. As you've no doubt heard, there have been developments that concern us all." "Developments is putting it mildly," said a woman with silver-streaked black hair, her aristocratic features set in a severe expression. "You were captured by hunters, Callum, with silver, the first breach of security in 50 years. And yet here I stand, Vera," Callum replied evenly, "thanks to Cassidy Marshall." He gestured to me, who not only freed me at great personal risk, but also burned the evidence of my presence and fled with me, severing all ties to her human life. All eyes turned to me with renewed interest. The weight of their combined gaze made me feel like a specimen under glass. "She knows of our existence now," said a younger man, leaning forward with his elbows on the table. "One human knowing leads to others. It always does." "Not necessarily, Gabriel," countered Elena, whom I was surprised to see seated at the table. "The girl has shown remarkable loyalty already, and she has nowhere to return to. Her own kind would punish her for aiding Callum's escape. So we're meant to adopt a stray human out of pity?" Sarah's voice cut through the room like a blade. She stood against the far wall, not seated at the table but clearly part of the proceedings. "Because she felt sorry for a chained wolf? We don't know her motives." "My motive was simple," I said, speaking for the first time, my voice steadier than I expected. "I couldn't stand by and watch a sentient being tortured to death, human or not." A murmur ran around the table at my words. Callum's hand pressed slightly more firmly against my back, a silent signal of approval. "Noble sentiments," said the white-haired man who had announced our arrival. "But they don't change the fact that humans now know of our existence in this territory. The last time that happened, I'm well aware of our history, Bernard." Callum interrupted. "But these circumstances are different. The hunters who captured me were few. 5 men, led by Cassidy's uncle. They were not part of an organized group, merely opportunistic. And with the cabin burned, much of their evidence is gone. They'll talk, Gabriel insisted. They'll gather more hunters. They always do. Perhaps, Callum conceded, but they'll be searching for a wolf, not a community. And by then, we can be prepared. Or relocated, suggested Vera. It wouldn't be the first time we've had to move the settlement. A ripple of discontent passed through the room at her words. I glanced at Callum, seeing his jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. Blackwater has stood for 3 centuries, he said, his tone measured but with an undercurrent of steel. This is our ancestral home. I will not abandon it at the first sign of trouble. Even if staying puts the pack at risk? Challenged Bernard. The pack is always my first consideration, Callum replied, a dangerous edge entering his voice. The atmosphere in the room shifted, charged suddenly with an energy I could feel prickling along my skin, which is why I've called not just our council, but representatives from the neighboring territories as well. As if on cue, the great wooden doors at the far end of the hall swung open. A group of newcomers entered, 3 men and 2 women, all carrying themselves with the same confidence as Callum. The leader, a tall man with copper hair and piercing amber eyes, surveyed the room before nodding respectfully to Callum. Alpha Blackwater, he said, his voice carrying a slight accent I couldn't place. We came as soon as we received your message. Alpha Riversong, Callum acknowledged. Thank you for responding so quickly. Please join us. The newcomers took seats at the table, their curious gazes lingering on me as they settled. I remained standing beside Callum, acutely aware of being the only human in a room full of werewolves discussing my kind as a threat. Now that we're all assembled, Callum continued, let's speak plainly. Yes, I was captured. Yes, humans know of our existence. But this presents not just a challenge, but an opportunity. Opportunity? Sarah scoffed from her position against the wall. To be hunted? To be exposed? To evolve, Callum countered. The world is changing. Humans have technologies, networks, communications that make staying completely hidden increasingly difficult. Perhaps it's time we considered a different approach. His words sent a shockwave through the room. Even I could sense the radical nature of what he was suggesting. You want to reveal ourselves? Bernard asked, incredulous. After centuries of secrecy? Not wholesale revelation, Callum clarified, but perhaps selective transparency, controlled contact, beginning with trusted individuals who could serve as bridges between our worlds. His eyes flicked briefly to me, and understanding dawned. That was why he wanted me here, not just to defend my actions, but as a potential first step in a new direction for his people. It would never work, Gabriel said flatly. Humans fear what they don't understand. And fear leads to violence. Not always, I said, unable to stay silent. All eyes turned to me again. Yes, some humans would react with fear, but others would adapt, accept. History is full of moments when people have embraced the different, the new, the previously unknown. Pretty words, Sarah dismissed. But your own uncle was ready to skin Callum for profit. Are we supposed to believe he's the exception, not the rule? I met her hostile gaze steadily. My uncle is a bitter, cruel man who taught me nothing but what not to become. He doesn't represent all of humanity, just as I'm sure the worst of your kind doesn't represent all werewolves. A heavy silence followed my words. Then, unexpectedly, Alpha Riversong laughed, a warm, rich sound that broke the tension. She has spirit, you're human, he said to Callum, approval evident in his tone. And she's not wrong. There have always been humans who accepted our kind, even protected us. They've simply been few and far between, and often met unfortunate ends for their trouble, added one of the women who had arrived with Riversong, her expression solemn. Which is why any change would need to be gradual, controlled, Callum said, beginning with establishing stronger ties between the packs so that we stand united whatever comes. The discussion shifted then, becoming more strategic, talk of reinforcing boundaries, establishing new patrol patterns. creating emergency evacuation plans. I listened, fascinated by this glimpse into the complex politics and practicalities of werewolf society. They were so organized, so cohesive, so human, in many ways, despite their dual nature. As the meeting continued, I found myself studying Callum. In this setting, surrounded by his peers and subordinates, he was transformed. Gone was the vulnerable, wounded man I had tended. Here stood a leader, commanding, strategic, and possessed of a natural authority that had nothing to do with physical intimidation and everything to do with an innate sense of responsibility. He cared deeply for these people, for their safety and future. It was evident in every word, every decision, and they respected him for it. Even those who disagreed with his approach, Sarah, Gabriel, deferred to his authority in the end. This, I realized, was what it meant to be an alpha. Not just strength or dominance, but the capacity to bear the weight of an entire community's well-being on your shoulders. It was impressive and oddly moving. The council meeting stretched late into the night. Eventually, a consensus began to form around a measured approach, increased security, limited information sharing between packs, and careful observation of human activity near their territories. Not the dramatic shift Callum had initially proposed, but a step in that direction. As for me, my presence remained contentious, but it was agreed that I would stay under Callum's direct protection until my status could be more permanently determined. I was neither prisoner nor fully accepted guest. I existed in a liminal space, much as I had in my human life. The irony wasn't lost on me. Finally, as midnight approached, Callum called the meeting to a close. We'll reconvene tomorrow to finalize the details. For now, rest, and know that Blackwater has weathered worse storms than this. The council members dispersed, many casting curious glances my way as they departed. Alpha Riversong approached us, his amber eyes warm as they settled on me. "You've chosen an interesting time to join our world, Miss Marshall," he said, his accent more pronounced up close, but perhaps that's fitting. Interesting times call for interesting people. "I didn't exactly plan this," I admitted. He smiled. "The best journeys rarely are planned. They simply unfold before those brave enough to take the first step." He turned to Callum. "We'll speak more tomorrow, old friend. For now, tend to your wounds and your guest." After the Riversong delegation had departed, Callum led me back upstairs to his quarters. The meeting had clearly taken a toll on him. Though he moved with the same fluid grace, I could see the fatigue in the set of his shoulders, the tightness around his eyes. "You need rest," I said, as he closed the door behind us. "The silver is working its way out of my system," he finished. "Thanks to you and Elena. I'll be fine." He moved to a sideboard and poured 2 glasses of amber liquid. "I think we both could use this." He handed me one, our fingers brushing briefly in the exchange. The simple contact sent an unexpected warmth through me, distinct from the burn of the whiskey as I took a small sip. "You did well tonight," Callum said, settling onto the couch with a barely suppressed wince. "Many humans would have cowered before a room full of werewolves. You stood your ground." I shrugged, taking the chair opposite him. "I've had practice being the outsider. In my uncle's house, in the town. I've never really belonged anywhere. At least here. I know why people are looking at me strangely." A shadow crossed his features. "You deserved better, Cassidy. Better than being made to feel unwelcome in your own home." "It wasn't really my home," I admitted quietly. "Just where I lived." "There's a difference," he agreed, swirling the whiskey in his glass thoughtfully. "Home is more than walls and a roof. It's belonging, security, acceptance, like you have here," I observed. "Despite the disagreements in the council, they all respect you, trust you. Trust is earned," he said simply. "Through consistency, through putting the needs of the pack above personal desires." A wry smile touched his lips. "Though I'm testing that trust by bringing you here." "I'm sorry for causing trouble," I said, guilt twisting in my stomach. "Don't be," he replied, leaning forward, his eyes intent on mine. "What you did took extraordinary courage. Most people, human or werewolf, live their entire lives without making a fraction of the difference you made in one night." His praise warmed me more than the whiskey. "I just did what felt right. That's rarer than you think." He set his glass aside, his expression turning more serious. Cassidy, there's something I need to tell you. Something I didn't share with the council yet. A knot of anxiety formed in my stomach. What is it? When you freed me from those silver chains. He paused, seeming to search for words. Something happened. Something I've never experienced before. I waited, pulse quickening inexplicably. There's a phenomenon among our kind, he continued, rare, almost mythical. A recognition. A bond that forms instantly, transcending rational thought. We call it the Luna bond. Luna. Like the moon. He nodded. Like the moon that calls to our wolves, that pulls at our very nature. A Luna is the alpha's mate, his equal, his balance, the one soul that complements his perfectly. The implications of his words began to dawn on me, sending a wave of disbelief washing through me. You're not saying, I felt it the moment you broke those chains, he said softly. A connection I can't explain, as if a part of me that had been sleeping suddenly woke. I stood abruptly, nearly spilling my drink. That's impossible. I'm human. You're a werewolf. We met yesterday. I know how it sounds, he said, rising to his feet as well, moving toward me with that fluid grace that seemed effortless despite his injuries. I didn't believe in the Luna bond myself. Thought it was just a story told to young wolves, a romantic myth. It has to be something else, I insisted, taking an involuntary step backward. Gratitude, the trauma of capture, the silver affecting your mind, it's none of those things, he said with quiet certainty. I've lived over a century, Cassidy. I know my own mind, my own wolf. A century? I repeated, latching onto the detail as my mind reeled. You're over 100 years old? A smile flickered across his face. Werewolves age differently than humans. But that's beside the point. He took another step closer, close enough now that I could feel the heat radiating from his body, could see the flecks of silver in his storm-gray eyes. The point is, there's a reason you felt compelled to save me. A reason you risked everything for a creature you didn't even believe existed until that moment. Compassion, I suggested weakly. Basic humanity. Perhaps those were part of it, he conceded. But not all. The bond works both ways, Cassidy. You felt it too. You just don't have the context to recognize it for what it is. Did I feel something? Beyond the obvious fear and adrenaline of the escape, beyond the disorientation of discovering a hidden world alongside humanity, was there something else? Some inexplicable pull toward this man who was so much more than a man? I thought of how natural it had felt to tend his wounds, to speak in his defense before the council. How my eyes sought him out in a crowded room. How his presence made me feel both unsettled and somehow right. As if pieces of a puzzle I hadn't known I was assembling were finally falling into place. Even if what you're saying is true, I said carefully, it doesn't matter. Your council barely tolerates my presence as it is. If they thought you were claiming a human as your Luna, They'd adapt, Callum interrupted, as they always have, as all of us must in changing times. He reached out, his fingers barely brushing my cheek. I'm not asking you to accept this tonight, Cassidy. Only to consider the possibility, to stay open to what you might feel, beyond the fear and confusion of your new circumstances. His touch was electric, sending currents of warmth cascading through me. I should step away, I thought dimly. This was too much, too fast, too impossible. And yet I found myself leaning almost imperceptibly into his palm, my body making a decision my mind wasn't ready to acknowledge. A sharp knock at the door broke the moment. We stepped apart as Callum called. Enter. Nathan appeared in the doorway, his expression grim. Alpha, we have a situation. Scouts have reported movement at the eastern boundary. Humans. Armed. The peaceful bubble that had enveloped us burst instantly. Callum's demeanor shifted, the leader replacing the man in the span of a heartbeat. How many? He asked, already moving toward the door. At least a dozen. They have dogs. Silver. They're searching in a grid pattern. Ice formed in my veins. My uncle, I whispered. He's brought reinforcements. Callum turned back to me, his expression hardened by necessity. but his eyes still soft when they met mine. "Stay here. You'll be safe." "But it's my fault they're here," I protested. "I should stay. Here." This time it was unmistakably in order, his voice resonating with alpha authority. "I need to know you're safe while I deal with this." Before I could argue further, he was gone, Nathan at his heels, leaving me alone with the remnants of our unfinished conversation and a growing sense of dread. My uncle was hunting us, and this time, he'd come prepared. I lasted exactly 7 minutes alone in Callum's quarters before the guilt and anxiety became unbearable. This was my fault. My uncle was here because of me, endangering an entire community that had existed in peaceful secrecy for centuries. I couldn't just hide while others faced the consequences of my actions. Decision made, I slipped from the room and made my way down the back stairs I'd noticed earlier. The settlement was in controlled chaos, wolves shifting forms, guards taking positions, families being moved to central buildings. No one paid attention to a lone human girl moving against the flow, keeping to the shadows. I had no plan beyond finding Callum, but instinct pulled me toward the eastern boundary. The forest was dark, but the moon provided enough light for me to follow the narrow path that led away from the settlement. The sounds of the night surrounded me, rustling leaves, distant howls, the occasional snap of a twig that made my heart stutter. I'd gone perhaps half a mile when a hand clamped over my mouth from behind. I struggled, terror flooding my system, until a familiar voice whispered in my ear. "Are you trying to get yourself killed?" Sarah hissed, releasing me and spinning me to face her. Her dark eyes flashed with anger in the moonlight. "The Alpha ordered you to stay put. I can't just hide while people risk their lives because of me," I whispered back fiercely. "My uncle is here for me as much as for Callum. I might be able to help." "How? By getting captured? By becoming a hostage they can use against us?" She shook her head in disgust. "Humans. Always thinking with your emotions instead of your brains." Before I could retort, a distant shout echoed through the trees, followed by the sharp crack of a gunshot. Sarah's head snapped toward the sound, her body tensing visibly. "That's it," she growled. "You're going back, even if I have to drag you." She grabbed my arm, fingers digging in painfully. "Wait," I pleaded. "Just let me see what's happening. Then I'll go back willingly, I swear." When she hesitated, I added, "Please, Sarah. I need to know." Something in my voice must have reached her. After a moment of internal struggle visible on her face, she released my arm with a curse. "Fine, but we stay hidden, and at the first sign of real trouble, we're gone. Understand?" I nodded gratefully, and she led me forward through the trees with silent grace, following paths invisible to my human eyes. We moved deeper into the forest, toward the source of the commotion. Finally, Sarah pulled me down behind a thick stand of bushes, and we peered through the foliage at the scene unfolding in a small clearing ahead. My breath caught painfully in my throat. Uncle Reed stood at the center of a group of armed men, at least 15 of them, more than Nathan had reported. They had high-powered rifles, hunting dogs straining at leashes, and what looked like silver-tipped spears. This wasn't just a search party, it was an extermination squad. Across from them stood Callum, flanked by Nathan, Elena, and several other wolves in human form. His posture was relaxed, almost casual, but I could see the coiled tension beneath the surface. "You're trespassing on private property," Callum was saying, his voice carrying clearly in the night air. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Uncle Reed spat on the ground. "Drop the act. We know what you are, what all of you are." He gestured with his rifle, monsters hiding in human skin. "The only monsters I see are the ones who chained a sentient being and tortured him for sport," Callum replied evenly. "But I'm willing to overlook that transgression if you leave now and don't return." A harsh laugh escaped my uncle's throat. "You hear that, boys? The animal wants to negotiate." He stepped forward, his weathered face contorted with hatred. "We're not leaving without the girl, my niece, the one you kidnapped." Beside me, I felt Sarah tense in surprise. I hadn't told her the leader of the hunting party was my relative. "No one was kidnapped," Callum said. "And no one will be taken against their will from these woods tonight. That's a promise." "A promise from a beast means nothing," Uncle Reed snarled. "Cassidy!" he shouted suddenly, making me flinch. "Cassidy, if you can hear me, run! We're here to save you." Save me. The absurdity of it would have made me laugh if the situation weren't so dire. The only person I'd ever needed saving from was him. Last chance, Callum said, his voice hardening. Leave now, while you still can. In response, Uncle Reed raised his rifle. I'll ask one more time. Where is my niece? What happened next unfolded so quickly that my human eyes could barely track it. One moment Callum was standing there. The next he was a blur of motion. There was a snarl, a scream, and suddenly Uncle Reed was on his back, his rifle 10 feet away, and Callum was above him, still human, but with something wild and dangerous in his eyes that made him look nothing like a man. I'm done asking nicely, Callum growled, and the sound raised the hair on my arms. Take your men and go. Now. Or none of you leave these woods alive. The other hunters raised their weapons, dogs barking frantically, but they hesitated to fire with their leader pinned. Reed's a fool, Sarah whispered beside me. He's facing not just our alpha, but a man defending his Luna. Even if he doesn't realize it yet. Her words sent a shiver through me that had nothing to do with the night air. Luna, the alpha's mate. The impossible bond Callum had tried to explain before we were interrupted. Was it real? Was that why I felt so drawn to him, so invested in his safety, despite having known him for barely 2 days? A movement at the edge of the clearing caught my eye. While all attention was focused on Callum and my uncle, I spotted a figure creeping through the underbrush with a raised rifle. My cousin Derek, taking aim at Callum's back. Without thinking, I burst from our hiding place, Sarah's startled curse following me as I ran into the clearing. Callum! Behind you! I screamed. Every head whipped toward me. Derek's finger tightened on the trigger. Time seemed to slow as I realized I wouldn't reach Callum in time, couldn't stop what was about to happen. Then something extraordinary occurred. The silver pendant at my throat, my mother's final gift, suddenly blazed with light so intense it illuminated the entire clearing. A shockwave of energy pulsed outward from it, sending Derek and the nearest hunters stumbling backward. The rifle discharged harmlessly into the air. The clearing fell into stunned silence. I stood frozen, my hand at my throat, feeling the pendant still warm against my skin. Cassidy, Uncle Reed breathed, staring at me with a mixture of shock and something that looked almost like fear. What have you done? What have you become? The same thing I've always been, I replied, finding my voice. Someone you never bothered to truly see. I moved to Callum's side, facing my uncle and the men who had hunted us. The pack members had closed ranks around us, a wall of protection. I'm here by choice, I told Uncle Reed, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. These people have shown me more acceptance in 2 days than you have in 10 years. They're not the monsters here. They've bewitched you, Uncle Reed insisted, scrambling to his feet. That's what their kind does. Tricks the mind. I laughed, a sound free of humor. The only trick was believing I needed your approval to have value. I'm done with that life, Uncle. Done with being invisible. Done with being less. I took Callum's hand, feeling the strength in his fingers as they intertwined with mine. Go home. Tell whatever story helps you sleep at night, but know this. If you ever come hunting here again, you'll find more than you bargained for. Something in my voice, in my stance, in the pendant still glowing softly at my throat, gave him pause. He looked from me to Callum, then to the werewolves surrounding us, their eyes reflecting the moonlight with an eerie glow. This isn't over, he said finally, but there was uncertainty in his tone now. Come on, boys. We're outnumbered tonight. Uncle Reed, I called as he turned to go. He paused, looking back at me over his shoulder. Tell Aunt Marian I'm sorry for the worry I've caused her, but not for the choice I've made. He didn't respond, just gestured for his men to retreat. We watched in silence as they collected their weapons and disappeared into the trees, the sounds of their passage fading gradually into the night. Only when they were truly gone did Callum turn to me, his expression a complex mixture of relief, anger, and something deeper I was just beginning to recognize. You disobeyed a direct order, he said, but there was no real heat in his words. I'm not one of your wolves, I reminded him. I don't take orders. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. No, you're something else entirely. His gaze dropped to the pendant, now dimmed to its usual silver gleam. Something I suspect we're only beginning to understand. Elena stepped forward, her eyes on my necklace. The pendant. It's silver, yet you wear it against your skin without harm, and that light. She looked at me with new respect. There's more to you than meets the eye, Cassidy Marshall. I don't understand what happened, I admitted, touching the pendant. My mother gave this to me before she died. She said it would help me see what others couldn't. I thought it was just a saying, a comfort. Perhaps, Elena said thoughtfully, or perhaps she knew more than she ever told you about your heritage, about who you really are. Before I could question her further, Callum's hand tightened on mine. The hunters may return with reinforcements. We need to prepare. He looked around at his pack. Double the patrols. Alert River Song. We stand together. As the others dispersed to carry out his orders, Callum turned back to me. We have much to discuss, he said quietly. About what just happened. About what I tried to tell you earlier. About your future. Here, if you want it. I looked around at the forest, at the werewolves moving with purpose through the night, at the man before me who had changed my world in ways I was only beginning to comprehend. For the first time in my life, I felt a sense of rightness, of belonging. I think I do want it, I said softly. Whatever it is, whatever it means. He smiled then, a true smile that transformed his face, softening the hard edges of the alpha into something warmer, more human. Then let's discover it together. As we walked back toward the settlement, his hand in mine, I realized something profound. I had broken the silver chains that held a wolf captive. But in doing so, I had also broken the invisible chains that had bound me to expectation, to loneliness, to a life half-lived. And in their place, I had found something far stronger, something that felt, against all odds and reason, like home.